Welcome to Wine and Wingspan, a weekly podcast where your new book besties, Jess and Jo, review their favorite and least favorite reads over a bottle of the good stuff.
We're here to have a good time and certainly don't want to ruin yours, so please check the title and trigger warnings so nothing is spoiled.
You may find that your opinion differs from ours, and we want to hear about it. So follow us on social media and let your voice be heard in our comments. Without further ado, cheers! Hi, hello, welcome to this week's episode of Wine and Wingspan. We are your hosts, Jess and Jo, and kind of every week, not really, we'll talk about it. We get into fantasy books and we talk about all of their smutty little smuttiness, but also we're going to start talking about other things too because we want to be different. Okay, so we'll just get into like the changes that are coming to start. First of all, hi Jess. How are you? Are you doing good? Jess and I have been hard at work figuring out, like everybody has a podcast, okay? Everybody on the freaking planet. And there are like 1,000 Sarah J. Maas podcasts now. And there are some really good ones. Fantasy Fangirls, Whimsy Gossip are just a couple good girls podcast, a few friends of the show. We absolutely love them. They are really great at dissecting books chapter by chapter, especially Fantasy Fangirls and Whimsy. I mean, they really have gone through the Massiverse line by line practically and dissected all of it. And we love them for that. And as you guys know, we've been going through the Massiverse, and are we really adding any new discourse? You know what I mean? Yeah. So, and we talk about Sarah J. Maas all the freaking time. So we kind of want to do something different. And so you guys may or may not know, Jess is a genius. Jess has BDE, big degree energy. She is studying to do archaeology because she's just that girl. And so we have someone who Jess knows so much about history and the context of a lot of this stuff. And authors reference real history when they write these books. They reference real things that we can look back at and then offer insight into the text we're reading. Even in the fantasy genre, there's so much that is sourced in real life. And so we thought, why not combine a little bit of this, a little bit of that? I'm more of an expert per se on storytelling and character building and things like that. And Jess is our resident history expert. So together we're unstoppable. So every week, we're going to go through some different books. We're going to take a step back from the Massiverse. We'll talk about Massiverse news. When the new ACOTAR book comes out, we'll talk about it. Don't worry, guys. But we're going to get into some other books that are really tickling our pickle. And Jess is going to walk us through some historical aspects of the books. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, the story building and the literary devices that these authors are using and kind of dissect the story. A lot of us will be I love that book. It was a 5-star. But why is it a 5-star? Why do we love these books so much? What draws us in? What keeps us coming back for more, So I hope that through our dissection of these books, we can offer a little bit of context and fun and a little bit of something different for your weekly book podcast listening, because I already know y'all are listening to podcasts that dissect the Massiverse. You don't need our opinion. So we're going to get started today with One Dark Window by Rachel Gillis, which I was on my TBR for forever. So many people were you have to read this book. It is literally so good. And I was yeah, okay. I've been in my Bridgerton era, as if you listen to the show, So I was okay, I'll get to it eventually. And then finally, I found it. I couldn't find a copy of it anywhere in any of my local bookstores. And then I finally found a copy. So we're going to talk about that today. And if you've read this book, then if you haven't, don't stop listening. You're going to get spoiled. But if you have, you know that this card game magic system is the center of the story. And it really reminded me of tarot cards. So I was like, Jess, give us the tea on the tarot and the trees. So Jess,
The trees.
take it away.
I think a lot of people are going to be kind of upset about the tarot cards because I didn't even know the history of tarot cards.
Well, I'm a tarot practitioner, so after, we could talk about it too from a witchcraft perspective, about my tarot
there's
cards.
2 stories of tarot, and the first one's just going to be the card game of tarot. And so I think that's where like a lot of misinformation happens is people are like, oh, well, it's to read your fortune. It's to do this. Well, that wasn't happening when this first came out. And I love this story because my expertise is Egypt and Roman Greek time period. And it ended up with the Egyptians. And I was like, yes. I was very excited. I was like, of course they're here. So with tarot, it was not originally used for fortune telling, but the game was developed somewhere around the 1400s. They did see the cards like at the 1420s in Germany, and then also in Italy, they have references back to like 1440s. So it was already a developed game at that point, which means it had been used long before that. You could get these beautiful cards made out of wood and painted with such detail. It was status at that point. If you were poor, you did not have these cards. You might have had a hand-me-down pair that you found somewhere that were just brutally taken, or you made your own. But if you had the highly decorative ones, you came from wealth. It was like a Stanley Cup kind of thing.
Ooh.
If you had these cards, it was like, oh, I'm cool. So, it's a very complex game. I started to go into the rules of the game, and then I was like, I'm gonna go in too deep. We gotta go back to the history.
Get out.
I was like Googling.
Pull me out.
My eyes are all red. So brief overview of just what the cards are. They're kind of similar to our regular deck of cards, and a mix with current day tarot cards. So there's values of like 1 through 10, king, queen, knight, and a knave, for 56 cards. And they call it the motto or the fool card. And then there's 21 trump cards. So the 21 trump cards is really where they're getting those tarot cards from. Originally, they don't think the trump cards were a part of that game. They think that actually came from Germany, not from Italy. Which I thought was really interesting that they're playing kind of one game in Italy and then another game in Germany, and then eventually they morphed. And it made me wonder, was there a war at this time where soldiers started playing games together from different countries, and then how they brought it together or something like that? Usually that's what it is. It's some kind of trade, and then people working together is where games kind of get passed along. So the trump cards for this are the sun, the moon, star, temperance, death, traitor, old man, wheel of fortune, fortitude, chariot, justice, love, pope, emperor, popus, empress, and the fool. So there's always a female card to a male card, which I found really interesting too, because if you think at that point in time, especially Italy or Germany, is mostly games were centered around men or masculine type things. Rather, this had a lot of feminine in it, which I thought it was very cool. And the fact that you had a pope and a popess, who let that happen? Because I wasn't the pope.
Yeah.
So kind of fast forward to present day tarot. Present day tarot you're using for people who do it for like daily reading of fortunes, or if you go down to New Orleans, you're going to see about 50 million tables set up, and people are going to read your fortune. It kind of depends on what you're seeking with the getting a fortune is what you're going to get. Everybody's experience with that seems to be really different. But how they came about is a man named Jean-Baptiste. He was a French occultist, and he was in the late 18th century. There's a little bit of time before that, a little bit of time after that. These numbers and these dates are not hard and fast. They're very vague. So there was a lot of rumors at that time with like divination and tarot, and he started writing all these books underneath like a secret name and bringing truth to tarot and bringing truth to divination. He backed it up with Egyptians. And so his whole thing, or the rumors he started, was that the Egyptians and the Book of Thoth were the evidence of this. That they this is what the Egyptians were doing, and they were so powerful. There was a lot of obsession with the Egyptians at the time too, and so it.
Is this when they were eating the mummies and stuff too?
God, I think right after, it would have been the start of this when they were like snorting the mummy powder. I'm like, man, people back then were so genius, blah blah blah. And then I like get into history, and I'm like, they were snorting mummy powder. They're literally
delicious.
snorting dead people. I just lost everything.
I'm not gonna tell you try it.
All respect for you guys.
I'm not gonna tell you try it.
It was crazy. They were just like, I'm just gonna snatch up this body and I'm gonna snort it. It's cool. It's fine. Don't worry about it. I just think of how nasty. That's pretty gross. So the god Thoth. So he is going to be. I'm like trying to back this up. I wrote other notes to make sure I don't get in too deep to where people are like, okay, I don't understand anything you just said to me. So he has he's a god of a lot of different things. Wisdom is one of them. So that's kind of where they took that. He also was like the arts of magic, judgment and death is one of his things that he did. What I realized with Egyptian gods is they wore a lot of different hats depending on the time period. There'll be some people that were like, he'd had nothing to do with judgment of death. And then you have to go look at the time period that they're like, actually he did. So everything with Egyptians is up to whether it was like New Kingdom, Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom. So anyways, so he used the Egyptians to kind of back that. Well, no one could really ask the Egyptians, so everyone was like, yeah, that sounds right. Yeah, of course they did. So, and he said, okay, because this god, he's full of knowledge and wisdom and stuff. He did this. So he began publishing works on divination and astrology, and he's very intelligent. He wasn't just a woo-woo kind of guy. He was very smart. He understood the world in a lot of different ways. So he was able to take a lot of facts to back up his research, and then sprinkle in some of that woo-woo to where you wouldn't look at it and really put anything into that. So he started reworking the cards to look very similar to the trump cards of medieval tarot. So the ones we were talking about before. And he said his big thing when everyone got excited was that the deck promised to reveal the theory and practice of ancient Egyptian magic through tarot. So everybody, of course, was like, give me tarot cards. I'm doing it every day. Eventually, this over time evolved more into the fortune-telling side rather than the personal journey side that he was kind of having people do. Mm-hmm. And then it really evolved to having each card having a massive meaning. And everybody interprets that meaning a little differently, though. But for the most part, a death card has something to do with death, you know? But yeah, also, fun fact, there's a full luxury deck of cards at Yale from the mid-15th century. So if you ever go that. And tarot is still played today all around the world. Those are my fun facts about tarot. But if you want to talk about tarot as in your side of tarot, because I don't know anything about it.
So I am a witch. Oh, what a surprise, guys. Is anyone shocked? No. This is actually a deck. I have several, but this is the one I've really been connected to lately. It's the Cozy Witch Tarot deck. If you are I know there's like a lot of crossover in the witch community and the book community. So if you're wanting to get into tarot, these are really great. This is what they look like on the back. How freaking pretty is that? Cute. It has all the minor arcana. So the cups are coffee cups. And then each of the tarot cards has a synopsis of the meaning of the card written on it, which is really nice if you're learning to do tarot. And you need pointers to remember what the cards are for. Like, here's the Two of Wands. Your decisions decide your future here, nothing else. So they're really great. They're beautiful cards. Look at this. How pretty is that? All the illustrations are so stunning. They're very bookish. And
super cute.
Also one of the co-hosts of the Good Girls Pod and a friend of the podcast, Jen, Quinn reads online. She gave me these. But they're so pretty. So I am a hearth witch, which we won't get into, but I use divination a lot in my life, and tarot is one of those things. And for me, and for a lot of witches I've spoken to, it's different for everyone. Some people literally believe that, their saint or god or goddess or deity or ancestors speak to them using the cards, kind of like a Ouija board or like a pentacle or something like that, like a spread where they can like talk with their ancestors. For me, I actually don't think that the cards like themselves are anything more than cards. You can pick them up off the shelf and buy them at Barnes and Noble. But I think that the power we prescribe to the cards is what makes them powerful. I do believe that like in life, you know, physically, like we give off vibration. When I was in sound engineering school, we learned a lot about how energy and vibrations can literally alter your physical state. Like you can make people really sick through energy. And so I do believe that like everything in the world, like physical and tangible we interact with has an effect on us. But really, I think the cards can be taken in so many different ways. That how I use tarot in my personal practice is I do draw regularly and ask questions that are super hyper specific, and then the cards just help me to like think deeply about my situation that I'm in maybe a way I hadn't thought of before. These cards, especially these ones, and I have another deck over there called the Modern Witch. These decks literally will call me out, and I'll be like, whoa, that is a blind spot I did not think of. It's kind of like having another person in the room talking to you, but you're alone. Of being like, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And so, but I think that really, you can do that with a lot of things. You know, I think that's like if you can have a list of things and roll dice, or having like a board where you have like, oh my gosh, why have I lost the name of it? It hangs on the end of, it swings. Pendulum. I have a moonstone pendulum. I've actually had some really crazy experiences with my pendulum we won't get into today, but like I've had some really intense readings, reading for people, reading for myself. But I think that that's just because humans are intense, and the cards have a way of, like anything, like books, like each other, we have a way of bringing out things that are unexpected, and I think that's what the cards do. I think that there's like a deep Romani history to them that, you know, we haven't gotten into today, but there are like spiritual aspects that people prescribe to them, and there's no judgment here. If you believe that the cards are like living, breathing, tangible things, or that the gods speak to you through them, zero judgment from us. The history of them is really interesting because, like Jess was saying, like there is this feminist almost history to them that is very interesting to me, of like this feminine representation. And in the original decks and like the ones that I have, there's like a lot of like nudity and like female empowerment. Like seeing an empress sitting on the throne with no man around her is like a very empowering image. I can only imagine being a young woman in like the 1400s seeing something like that and being like, whoa, like, you know, that's crazy. So I love tarot a lot, but I think that with all things as a witch, things only have power that you prescribe to them. So if you don't believe in tarot and you think it's just a fun game, then that's all it'll ever be for you. If you think that tarot is something that helps lead you in your daily life, then it shall be. So yeah.
You were talking about energy, and it's really interesting. I took this class about like ancient shamanism, and how these people who are really skeptic of shamans and their abilities and stuff like that go and spend massive amounts of time with them, and they're like, I saw things I never thought I could see. Yeah. And a lot of it goes back to somewhat drug-inducing things, but also like music and beats, and then also like flipping that into the Christian world, tongues during the music, during the beats, during this. There is such a parallel between you go to like every single religion or any kind of practice, there is something like that is energy from music or noise, and that's how it starts.
Yeah, the most powerful reading I had ever, one of them, was with my friends on a beach. So we're listening to the waves crashing in like this rhythmic tone, and it was actually with this deck. I read everybody's tarot that was there, and I mean, it was so spot on. It was so insane, and every single card that I drew was based around the ocean. It was insane. Yeah, we were like covered in goosebumps, and they were all very unique reads. And no matter, like, there was one I was like, no, that doesn't feel right. And we redrew, and it was like, again, I was like, that is crazy. Like, it was so crazy. But these cards, like, they like with everything, you can have very intense experiences with them. And so as I was reading this book, I was just imagining like these, like, my own tarot cards, because they're like these beautiful cards, like you were saying with the luxury deck, which if I can find a picture of the one at Yale or any of them, I'll put them on the screen. Just like you were saying earlier, that with not being able to afford them, like they were this luxury item, and like the people that had them, it was like, wow, you have this powerful card. And then with the kind of like a rewriting of history with their origin, and like, where does this magic come from? I saw a lot of that in One Dark Window with the Shepherd King story and the book of, what was it called? What did they call the book?
I forget. The trees book?
Yeah, the Book of Alders, the old Book of Alders.
Yeah.
And like the Shepherd King, people like, oh, well, this is the price you pay. And the Shepherd King in her head is like, no, that's not correct. Like, that the actual meaning is this, like the nightmare card, like, oh, I'll make your nightmares come to life. And he's like, kinda, yeah, but there's like, it's a little different than what people think. Over time, it's been twisted and perverted, and like, that's the history of most things is that way. So I thought with the tarot, that would be like an interesting parallel of a card game.
Yeah.
And also in the book, they play with these powerful cards like it's just a game. At a couple points, like, it's not even like, they're not taking into account the like spiritual, magical aspects of the cards. They're just like playing a drinking game, and it reminded me of.
And then the way they
tarot.
trade them like their currency. So whenever her cousin gets, is going to be the bride, and she gets the beauty card, it's really interesting to see that there was no, like, that was the dowry. There was no money. I don't think they've ever spoke about money in the books that I can remember.
It's cards. It's all about cards.
Which card do you have, and how are you passing down your card? So if you lose your card, it's over. Like, you could potentially lose everything off of one card.
Elspeth's dad giving her the well was like giving her a wedding gift. And like the weight of that, just whenever I was reading through your notes about like the luxury cards, I was like, oh, like, this feels like a history. But that wasn't the only aspect of some like mythology magic in this book. And if you are a practitioner of tarot, if you have thoughts about the history of tarot, leave a comment down below here on YouTube. We want to like know, or if you're listening on like podcasts, go over to our YouTube channel and like leave a comment on the Tarot and Trees episode, because I want to hear your thoughts. I've been practicing for a few years, but I know that there are going to be people listening that have been practicing for decades, and I would love to hear your thoughts about our take on the history of tarot and its relation to One Dark Window. But we also there was another part which I freaking love in books, when there's like an etymology, when there's like a name or a symbol that when you investigate its deeper meaning, you're like, whoa, like that, a clue hidden in plain sight. And the most obvious one to me was the trees. Every character's house is represented by a tree. I've never seen that before in a book. So I thought that was really interesting. Like, what a very unique take on that. So Jess did some research for us about trees. So let's get into it.
The Celtic trees is definitely out of my realm too. I was like, we're going in far away from where I am. So once again, I did notice a parallel though between like Egyptians and Celtic, where it's time period. So depending on what time period you're in depends on what's the level of importance and probably which tree matters the most. But I just picked some from the names. So trees were like the life force of life. It's like literally the tree of life. So everybody probably knows that. It's like there's like the tree of life in Africa, and there's a tree of life here. There's some kind of representation, the great oak, etc. So the tree of life, you're looking at that, and it is literally the life force. It's Mother Nature. It's the earth. It's everything. Like everything falls into the tree of life. So when you were named after a tree, or you had a tree in your name, or you had your family crest or symbol with a tree on it, it was very powerful. It was very, very important. They talk about regeneration and love and power and protection with the trees. If you go back to just like hunter-gatherer times and you think about that, trees provided shelter, especially if you weren't in like an area where there's caves. Trees gave you food, trees gave you shelter, they protected you, they nurtured you, they were your mother in a way. And then whenever they did start settling, they used those trees to create their homes. It was a very symbolic and a very real ritualistic kind of system that was happening there. There was a lot of gratitude towards the environment and towards what the trees were giving them. So with the hawthorns, a hawthorn was a symbol of regeneration, love, and protection.
Makes so much sense.
Yeah. Whatever. I was like, hang on, wait, whose last name was that again? I looked up. I was like, oh, there it is. Okay.
Yeah.
The yew tree I found a lot on, though. I never even knew a yew tree existed. That was one that I was like, why did she name all these people trees except for yew? And I went like Googled yew, and I was like, oh, it is a tree.
That would be
My
a tree.
I was like, is this significant? I also do wonder if some of these names that she was like, okay, I gotta come up with another tree. Oh, let's just pick you, or something like that. That if there was a tree that she just randomly pulled out of a hat versus everything else, because these are pretty similar to the characters. So yews were actually associated with death. And they were mostly found along church grounds. So this would have been a newer version of how they looked at trees. I couldn't find anything much older than that. So if we're thinking of now, we're in societies that are built and that are having churches and that they're having places of worship and stuff. They did not say whether the church was a Christian type church or something that we're going even farther back, looking at gods and goddesses of Celtic mythology. So I don't know who they were worshiping and if that has a parallel with the yews and the death. But either way, I think that church grounds, that's where everyone was buried, no matter what. Basically, throughout most time when you started settling, you wanted to be close to your religious affiliation, unless you had like a necropolis or something like that outside of a city. So it just kind of depends on how your city was set up. But anyways, I digress. So according to the legend, and I'm going to butcher this because I just can't say anything, Deirdre?
Might be Deirdre.
Cool, we'll go with that. Of Sorrows. So there's like this whole book, and it's basically like, okay, so her and her husband's graves were there with the yew trees, and the yew trees were twined together. And this story's told through a lot of different religions, especially ancient. Like there's Native American stories that follow along with this too. So I got in really deep. So basically, there was a two yew trees that had grown together and knotted together, and what it represented was a story of this woman and her husband, who she was supposed to marry somebody else, but she loved her husband, and she sacrificed everything to be with him instead. And she said, I will do whatever. And it also really reminded me of like the Tudors, where one of the last wives, Catherine, wrote the letter knowing she would die. She was performing her yew tree love, basically, is how I thought of it. And so the tops, they grew up next to each other, and the tops had become so close they became one. And so it was a very symbolic of a love becoming into true love, to where you are really with that person, and you would do anything. So they intertwined, and no one can part them. So Forbidden Love story. It's a very, very cool story. And if you start reading that one, try to find the other ones too with it. It's interesting to see how these stories were happening in all sorts of places around the world. But, I mean, there's no way they would have been communicating at this time. These people had no trade routes ever. They would have been thousands of years afterwards before these people started their great ancestors started trading. So I always find that really cool. It's like, where did these stories come from? They had to have come from something, and how are they so similar? But I did really like that. I think there was a lot of, I don't want to say forbidden love in the story in One Dark Window, but there kind of was. Like, they weren't meant to kind of really
taboo love for
fall
sure.
for each other.
Yeah,
taboo. So not as far as forbidden or anything where she like Elspeth was like betraying anybody, but there was hints of that in there. And then so the Rowan tree, it's a sacred tree, and it represents power, protection, mystery, all those kinds of things. And then there was a lot of conflict with spindle trees. And I think this really had to go back to the timelines where it kind of depended on what people believed, depending on what time it was. So it refers to luck or the stories of spinning, which I found really interesting. And I was like, okay, we're going to run with the spinning thing. And so it was a honor of tribe and community. And I kind of thought about a parallel of Elspeth's father being so high in rank too, that he was very honorable within the community. And that's probably why Elspeth got away with no one knowing about her for so long too, because no one's looking at his daughter. But so stories of spinning I thought was really interesting, how the Shepherd King spins stories constantly, and he did this with Elspeth. I always did wonder if he chose her versus her just touching that card and getting him. He was in that card for a very long time.
Yeah.
He chose her.
It's also like she's the one spinning the story for us as the narrator of the story. But I mean, if you look at it as luck, in a way, she's lucky that she found the Shepherd King. I have not read the second book, by the way, guys, but I mean, knowing how books end, I'm assuming the fog gets banished and everybody's happy, hunky-dory. Would have probably never happened if she wouldn't have touched the card. So, like, in a way, by freeing him from the card, the whole story is able to come full circle. Otherwise, he would have been trapped there forever, and I'm assuming they would not have been able to finish the story out. I haven't finished it yet, but we're going to get there.
I'm, like, holding my tongue, and I'm going to choose my words really carefully.
Yeah, the trees are so interesting. Like the hawthorns being a symbol of regeneration makes so much sense as their, Elspeth's place of healing, her like she's within a bubble of protection as long as she's there. Her aunt is very much her motherly figure in life. The yews also being on the church grounds, I found to be a really interesting tie-in to the stone table room. Because that's kind of like a very magical spiritual place, and the yews are kind of like protectors of that space. And obviously it's not necessarily even a forbidden love, but the fact that it's a difficult love. Like Raven and Elspeth are having to overcome so much in order to be together, be happy, and be free. And growing together, and by the end of their journey, no one will be able to part them, that kind of thing. And then with the Rowans, I think that the power and mystery part of it, the Rowans are so interesting. They're just a very interesting group. All of them are like kind of the cheese stands alone type of people, which is interesting. But that's our little history lesson. So I hope you guys enjoy that. I'm glad that Jess is able to flex the history muscles on all of us. But getting into the literary perspective of this book, when we did our Crescent City review, I did each book according to a hero's journey. And one thing I loved about this book is that it is like a hero's journey, but it's more of like a hero's anti-journey. Traditionally, your hero's journey is this, like, just to boil it down to very quickly, you have a call to be something greater, a journey upwards into becoming great, the test of your greatness, victory, happiness. In this book, it's more of a descent than an upwards. She kind of starts at the top of knowing that she's already great. Like a lot of heroes start out being like, I'm just some guy. I think Hercules is the ultimate hero's journey, one of the original hero's journeys. He knows that he has no idea that he is the son of a god, that he actually has all these super great powers and that he's going to be a hero. Elspeth knows that she is infected, that she has powers, that her magic is very strong and very rare and could be very world changing, but she is not willing to risk it all. She has way too much at stake. And that's where she starts. She starts already at her challenge and she just descends from there. As she becomes more powerful and takes more heroic steps, kind of like just going to Hercules, as Hercules defeats his, foes, he becomes more and more powerful and is able to take on stronger foes. In Elspeth's journey, the more foes she takes on, the weaker she becomes. And instead of thwarting the monster within, she becomes a slave to the monster within, which is a really different take on the hero's journey. Almost every single book that you read will follow the hero's journey. It is a tale as old as time. As long as we've told stories, we've told the hero's story. Every classic piece of literature that you find is probably going to follow this formula. And they don't always end happily. Tragedies, the hero's journey ends in death. That's just what it is. But like every book, all the SJM books, they follow the hero's journey. And this one is just the complete opposite. To end a book with the hero being completely incapacitated and taken over by a monster we don't see that ever. Not in this way. To where there's no diving into my power. There's no, oh, I'm comatose, but I'm going to come back. The way that she leaves this is that Elspeth's dead, she's not coming back. She sacrificed everything. She made the ultimate sacrifice. And not because she's so strong and she gave everything up, but rather because she's literally so weak that she's just going to die. Almost like a terminal illness, which was a really interesting way, like a very interesting magic system that the more you use your magic, the sicker you get. And with the card users, like they don't really degenerate. Like you see Elm have a nosebleed and that's pretty much it. Like we don't really get to see the effects of the Providence cards being used too much in the way that we see the degeneration of Emery and Elspeth in this book, which I just find to be really interesting. The magic system in this book is unlike anything I've read, and everything has a cost. The Shepherd King's irony in this book was also really interesting. He's a wolf leading the sheep. Just his name is ironic. A shepherd king in and of itself kind of was giving me some biblical nods as well. Shepherds are typically the lowest of society, kings the highest, and like a shepherd's crook. He references his crook a lot, which were meant to beat off wolves and also like save wolves from being stuck on like hills, save the sheep from being stuck on like hillsides and stuff. It was like a protection piece. So interesting that he is a wolf, but he's the shepherd, which would be what he would like be, beating off with a stick. He also,
but it's also a symbol, that same symbol in Egyptian times, something that the pharaoh carries.
Yeah, you're kind of a leader.
Too.
Yeah. And biblical, like Jesus, like in the biblical context, like Jesus being a king, but also being a shepherd, leading by like words instead of leading by cruelty, because like a lot of people will relate like the shepherd's crook to like leading the sheep, but it was actually to like beat off wolves and stuff. So like keeping your people safe. But it's interesting that he's like, I'm a shepherd. I guide, I lead, I protect, but he mostly leads his people and through the form of riddles. Like all of these cards and things that he's done are riddles, but the answers are always hidden in plain sight, which is interesting. So he's a very, very interesting character. When you meet him, I hated him. I hated this character so much in the beginning. But then by the end of the book, you know, he hates Raven, which we'll get into Raven, but he hates Raven. And then by the end, he's like, tell Raven the truth. Do you care for him? Do you love him? And has enough care for Elspeth that he gives her privacy. He respects her. He's leading her in the right direction, which is just interesting. And I do think that the Shepherd King can be a little problematic, where it's like, you should be grateful to me. I have literally protected you all this time. She's like a mortal. Like, she's like a little, like, fragile human. But also, he did the most important thing for Elspeth, which was to be wary. He taught her to be wary. Yeah. But he also does this to us as the reader from the beginning of the book. By the end of the book, you start questioning everybody, even Raven. And that is because of the Shepherd King's consistent dialogue through the book. When I finished it, I went back and read some of their inner conversations where he's talking to Elspeth and Elspeth's just completely ignoring him. And it's almost like he's talking to us as the reader and being like, can you believe this guy? I don't trust this dude. You need to be wary. And so it's interesting that as the reader too, by the end of the book, like when Raven finds out about the Shepherd King, I was like, I don't trust this. I feel like Raven's going to turn on her. But I would have never thought that at the beginning of the book. When you first meet Raven, I'm like, oh, this guy is the guy. But the Shepherd King, literally, the literary devices that Rachel Gillis uses in this book, she has this, it's not an unreliable narrator, but this second narrator that's contradicting the narrator constantly, and makes you wary even of Elspeth, makes you wary of every character, which is just so immersive. I felt like I don't know who to trust. And I loved that. As it's interesting that as the hero of our story fades away, the story becomes more and more interesting. And as she fades away, so does her humanity. Like, she really gives way to the Shepherd King. At the beginning of the book, she is terrified of Emery, and she would never have asked Emery to look into her mind at the beginning of the story. As she's fading away, she's losing time, and the Shepherd King is taking over more and more. She's begging Emery, use your powers on me, even though she knows the cost, personally, of using your magic too often. She's kind of callous about it. And then she's like, man, I probably shouldn't have asked him to do that. Oh, well. Like, Elspeth at the beginning of the book would have never had the guts or had the callousness to do that.
She's getting desperate, too.
Yeah, as she's fading away, the Shepherd King is taking over in these ways that isn't like, I can feel him taking over. She's just becoming the Shepherd King and becoming a monster. And the story becomes more and more interesting. The tangles and lies, as the lies are dispelled, she's tangled even more, which is interesting. So this book, I have to say, Sarah J. Maas, I know that you're not listening, but if by the grace of the gods you are, this book is how you do a fucking riddle, okay? Please take notes. Amarantha, the answer is love. This is how you do a fucking riddle. If you go back through and read at the beginning of every chapter the books that are the cards, it is so interesting. By the end of the book, the clues and things that are dropped through.
Yeah.
I felt like this was SJM level lore in one book. And it's only a duology. So I found that to be really great. But like, seriously, if you're going to write a riddle, do not Amarantha it. One Dark Window it. This shit was so good. The language, the way that she has this modern but not quite modern language used by the characters, sets the scene as this medieval Game of Thrones fantasy type world, Lord of the Rings-esque setting. And then she reaches even further back into this Old English, Middle English type of speak that is, in itself, you never see the nightmare really. You do a little bit, but you don't get to, like, with a lot of characters, it's like, oh, I get to see his facial expressions. I get to see the way he moves his hands and the way that he moves through the world and how he interacts with other people. We only get to see the nightmare interact with Elspeth and then with Raven a handful of times and with the king once. But we learn so much about the personality of the Shepherd King just through the way he winds his words in this sing-songy, like, this rhyming way that you could practically see his face when the way that
you felt connected to him.
Yes. And it gave so much life to the book considering he's dead. So I found that to be really great. Overall, this book was a 5 out of 5 for me, literary perspective. It was written beautifully. I did not see a single typo, which is crazy because I've seen a lot of typos in books lately. They're pumping them out to us. And I didn't see any. 0 plot holes. I mean, the fact that the degeneration touches everyone, every single person that we meet was crazy. There were things I didn't love about the book. I think what I'm learning, because we talked about Ruthless Vows. And what's the first one?
Divine Rivals.
I keep forgetting. Divine Rivals. I think I just don't love duologies. I don't love that by the time we get to the story, it's basic, like, the problem is like 75% solved. I would have loved to have come in and 4 cards been found rather than like 8. The well card was like the easiest thing on the planet to get a hold of, and by the time that she gets it, her degeneration has progressed so much that her humanity has slipped away, and she's so weak that the emotional response I expected to a moment like that she has waited her whole life for was just like, yeah, I was sad, and that was pretty much it. So I was like, okay. And even with the fight, I mean, Jess and I were talking about this right before we started recording. I don't feel like enough people died in this book, and I don't feel like the fight on the road for the card was good enough. I think that somebody should have been mortally wounded and, like, badly wounded. I know that, like, Jesper was, like, kind of hurt, but, like, not enough. I think somebody should have died. I think that the parents and the kid probably should have died. There just wasn't enough death for a dark book. And I'm sure there's going to be more in the next one. But, I mean, it's literally one dark window, and there were 0 people died. You know, Elspeth, I guess. But not really. Her body's still alive. And she's going to come back. I'm not stupid. So, this is... It wasn't dark enough. I think that there should have been...
I can't wait for you to read book 2.
I know. I'm very excited because I want people to die. Raven, by the way, is the ultimate book boyfriend. What a guy.
Yeah.
He's so hot.
He's great.
Yeah. He's like, you know what?
And the thing is, it's like, he doesn't have to try to be hot. Like, sometimes when we read some of these, like, the book boyfriends have to try to be hot.
No, he's just hot.
He's just there.
He's just hot. He is Book Talk's ideal book boyfriend, in that he is ambiguously brown, which is what my husband and I call it. My husband is ambiguously brown, and I live for it. He's got a crook in his nose. Everybody's got a big nose, and I love it. They're like, this dude is like kind of ugly a little bit, and he's hot for it. He's got got calloused hands. His hands are so rough. And then he's got dark hair. I'm like, as soon as he's a brunette, I'm like, well, this isn't gonna be a secondary lover thing. This is the guy. He's brunette. This is Endgame. Raven is Endgame. Also, his name's Raven. With a Y, too. It doesn't get hotter than that. So, he is great. The smut was so good in this book, especially with duologies, you just don't have a lot of time. You don't have chapters and chapters to waste on smut. You're getting through your story in, like, 600 pages, which is less than, like, one Crescent City book. So, you are, like, speeding through the story. So, The fact that we
tension
got
was really well played too.
Whew.
Because a lot of times people will put tension and put so much emphasis on tension that you're like, "Ugh, I get it."
Yeah.
She
I
sprinkled
love
it so well. Yeah.
fake dating tension is just, and it's never really fake. That's the thing. Like from the minute that they meet, you're like, they're gonna fuck for sure. They're fucking. That I love that. So overall, the setting, the magic system, the characters, the tension, the angry tension between her and Elm not going away. And not being like, well, now we're friends, but being like, I seriously still do not trust you. I like you, but I don't trust you. All of it, even her and Raven, like you can handle yourself, but also like we need each other. Like everything about this book is perfect. Perfect. I think my only complaint is I wish there was more. And I feel like that's a good complaint to have. I wish there was more. I wish this series was like 5 books long. And I'm sad that I'm gonna finish it in the next book. Like I'm depressed.
Yeah.
Because
I'm
this
to see
book
what
is
she
perfect.
writes next. Because the bar is pretty high for Rachel now. Like whatever she writes next has to be just as good as this. I like this book so much. Don't get me wrong, I love a good smut scene. I do. But this is a plot book with some smut, not a smut book with some plot, you know.
And the smut is appropriate, well placed.
Yes.
And it's not overboard. It's not like, and then we boned for days. It's like, yeah, you don't have time. Like, you don't have time for that. Like,
but also, Elspeth isn't going to be very experienced, you know. So she played into that really well too. I feel like
I like that she wasn't a virgin.
She made the smut true. Yes, that too. She made the smut true to her characters, you know. And I think that was, and then also the Shepherd King's just sitting there waiting for them to get done.
Man, this guy lasts a long time. Yeah, I loved it. I think I really feel like this was a 5 out of 5 book for me. This is a book that when people are like, I want to get into fantasy, I want to get into like a little bit of a spicy romance, this is a book I'm going to recommend. I mean, every time. I'm going to be like, One Dark Window. Short, not so short. It's like 400 pages, but short enough where it's not overwhelming. You could read this in like a week. It's like a weekend book if you're a fast reader. It's got an incredible plot. The magic system is very easy to understand. All of the magic is quantified, and the magic that's unquantified is very straightforward. Emery, I touch you. I see everything about you. It's killing me. For Elspeth, I have this monster inside of me. He gives me strength. Every time I ask for help, it's killing me. Raven, the cards have no effect on me. But also every year I no longer can use a card. Like it's very straightforward. So I love that. This is masterful storytelling. The tension, there's this brightness and fanfare to the world while also having this dark underbelly of these like plague doctor type characters that was just so good. It was giving plague. It was almost giving this.
Do plague doctor for history for the second book.
Yeah, let's do that.
History. That might be what we do.
Yeah, I so literary wise, historical reference wise, I mean. It is a 5 out of 5. It's a perfect book. And I can't recommend it enough. Please tell us in the comments over on YouTube and on our social media, like, how'd you feel about this book? Did you like it? Did you have complaints about it? I mean, getting a 5 from me is difficult. So and this, you know what actually the Shepherd King reminded me of? There is this book called A Court of Honey and Ash, I think is the one I'm thinking of.
I to say Thorns and Roses.
No, a book I'm thinking of. Thorns and Roses? I cannot remember the name of the book, but in it, she has a mentor that is like an ent, like a living tree. And he turns out to be this, spoiler alert, turns out to be like an ancient king that's trying to get revenge on this like witch that enchanted him. But he is like a like this mentor figure throughout the story, and also like speaks in this like kind of riddle old man type of vibe, and that's what he reminded me of. And so then the whole time I was like suspicious. I'm like, are you gonna betray Elspeth? Please don't. Also, if you're a video game lover and you like Elden Ring, the vibes of this book reminded me of Elden Ring, which is a Dark Souls game. And in Elden Ring, like the characters speak in like this Middle English riddle type of vibe, and this reminded
so
me.
bad
And
at
like
riddles.
well, him sitting there in the armor, like in the full armor, like on the stone, and then she keeps having this like recurring dream of him. It just reminded me so much of Elden Ring. Like that is something you would say in that game. So it was also giving me like, there's this trend right now of in Japanese games of like medieval, like a medieval game, like medieval fantasy, and that's what it was reminding me of. So Rachel Gillis, I don't know if you're a big JRPG player, but it was giving Japanese role-playing game. So thank you for that. So final thoughts, Jess, on the book. What did you rate it?
Oh, 5 out of 5. Both of them. I like the first one better than the second one. Usually that always happens. But both of them. This was like, I recommended this book like 30,000 times to everybody. It's so good. It's an easy read. It's not high stakes, but it's not low stakes. It's like medium. So,
Yeah.
And you don't have to remember so much. It doesn't feel like it sucks your soul to read this book sometimes.
Yeah.
So I think that was another big thing for me. She writes so beautifully. She creates a world so beautifully. I like the time period that she put it in, everything. I think she's an amazing author. It did go a little viral for a little bit, which I think was very well deserved. I think it should be more viral. This should be in everybody's TBR, on their bookshelf. It's so stinking good. So good.
Yeah, sometimes when books go really heavily viral on TikTok, I'm a little skeptical, because like that was me with Ruthless Vows. I was like, not Ruthless, I mean, yes, with the second book especially, but with Divine Rivals, it went so insanely viral, and it was like, this book's gonna change your life. And then for me, I was like, I mean, it was fine, like it was okay, but it didn't,
It was
like,
good. I don't know if it was that much. Yeah,
it didn't blow my mind. Like this wasn't like the best literary experience of my life. But then there are books like this one. Song of Achilles is another one for me that was like super hella viral and lived up to every second of the hype. I cried my way through that book. But there are a lot of books like that. Oh, you're gonna weep. There are a lot of books like that like go viral, and then I'm like, I mean, they're fine, but they're not like life changing.
Well, that was disappointing.
Yeah, seriously, that's how I felt with Divine Rivals when it ended. I was like, okay. I mean, the vibes were there, but like it's giving like Peaky Blinder knockoff. I don't know what to do here. So
interesting. I didn't
yeah,
yeah, I get that.
Yeah, I've been watching Peaky Blinders, and I was like, it's giving Divine Rivals.
Such a good show.
It's giving Divine Rivals, as if like the Peaky Blinders history isn't the more real one than the Divine Rivals.
Why does this feel like Divine Rivals?
Oh my god, it's giving... this is literally straight up ripped off of Divine Rivals. This is based on real life, Joe. So, I mean, this entire... By the way, this is 2 stacks. I don't know if you can tell, but there are 2 stacks here.
You gotta
that plus this plus this. Half of this is my TBR. Someone stop me, please.
Busy.
So all that to say, there are a lot of like big book talk hits in here, but then there's a lot of books in here that have nothing to do with book talk because I don't trust y'all anymore. I do not trust. I don't trust. Divine Rivals was my 13th reason on book talk, but this book deserved all the hype. It really did.
100%.
Such a good book. Cannot get over it. Wish I could read it for the first time again.
I know this is definitely one that I probably will reread. I rarely reread a book. and
but
I
this
will probably
one.
reread this one.
This one. I want Dalton to read it. This is a book where I'm like,
Ooh,
Dalton,
Dalton would
you
like
can, before you read Throne of Glass, read this. Because he's almost done with ACOTAR. I'm going to be like, read One Dark Window. Oh, it's so good.
Is he in Silver Flames yet?
He's about to start it, finally. So
I need a play-by-play for everything
I know.
he talks about throughout it. 'Cause
So-
he's so funny.
Dalton is we're about to face reveal my husband on my TikTok. So once I do my husband hard launch, and he's done with, once he's done with ACOTAR, I think he may come on the podcast and give us his full thoughts on the entire series in a little Dalton segment.
He won't let up either. He will give
He
harsh
has
opinions.
thoughts. Yeah, he has thoughts.
He always has receipts to back him up, though. That's why I'm like, okay,
Yeah,
these
I'm
are
like,
really good
no,
points
he's got
and
valid
notes.
opinions. Yeah, I'm scared for him to read Throne of Glass. He's gonna rip that series to shreds. My mom finished ACOTAR. She read the whole thing, my mom, and she loved it. She is a Nesta girl.
Really?
I know. And she just finished the first Throne of Glass book. She started Crown of Midnight, and she is a Kale girly through and through. She hates Dorian. I was like, oh my god.
I'm like so confused in Throne of Glass. I was like, who are we going for?
Yeah.
What are we? What's happening? It threw me off a lot.
So I'll keep you guys updated on my mom's Throne of Glass journey, because she's like, I love Selena. And I'm like, that's surprising, because I hated Selena. Could not stand that girl. Was ready for her to be done. I'm like, enough's enough, girlfriend. You are annoying and bratty. So, and then I felt terrible after reading Assassin's Blade. So, you live and you learn.
You're like, okay,
So-
your trauma makes sense now. I kind of feel bad.
Yeah. So, yeah. Well, guys, those are our thoughts on One Dark Window. We are going to talk about Two Twisted Crowns in 2 weeks. We're going to be changing up our schedule a little bit. We're busy girlies, okay? We've got a lot going on in our lives. We're both moms. If you follow me on TikTok, you know I'm traveling like constantly right now.
All the time.
All the time. Thank you guys so much for all the support and love on our social media lately. Jess has completely taken that over and is absolutely killing it.
I don't know what I'm doing.
The videos have been giving. I've been cracking up because I don't know what's gonna be posted. So, so we're gonna go to an every other week posting schedule, just to like give ourselves a little bit of a breather and some breathing room. And so that as I'm traveling, like, we don't just continuously miss episodes, because that's stressful and we want to be consistent for you guys. So, Two Twisted Crowns.
Better quality episodes too.
Yeah, I want
think
to
that's
do.
what's really important. Yeah.
I want to do more
give you
like of
good
the
stuff.
history stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
So first episode back is going to be going out on. You're listening to this on July 17th. So our next episode is going to come out on the 31st. So we will see you guys in the next one. Bye.
Bye.
Yay, balloons and confetti!
Well, hi, lords and ladies. That is it for this episode of Wine and Wingspan. Make sure you're following us on TikTok, Instagram, and everywhere you listen to podcasts at Wine and Wingspan Pod.
Have a book you'd like us to talk about or a hot take you want us to break down? Send us all your opinions to wineandwingspanpod@gmail.com. May your glass be full and your wingspans be long.